Hey everyone, welcome. Have you ever wondered what actually separates an okay teacher from a truly masterful one? Well, today we're going to zoom way in on the science of pedagogy and offer a true Scharf Mufasser, a highly detailed, deep dive explainer of teaching mastery. We're literally putting the entire classroom under the microscope today. We'll be unpacking the fundamental building blocks of how we teach and, honestly, more importantly, how we learn to teach better.
So let's quickly run through our syllabus for this explainer. We've got basic concepts of teaching, objectives and learning domains, anatomy of a lesson, the power of descriptive feedback, and we'll wrap up with mastering microteaching. Let's get right into it.
Section 1. Basic Concepts of Teaching.
There is this classic quote, "By failing to prepare, you are preparing to fail," and it completely nails the foundational ethos of education. Why do we spend hours meticulously planning before ever stepping foot in front of our learners? Because teaching isn't just about winging it, right? It's a highly calculated, intentional process. A well-prepared teacher doesn't just manage the clock better. They project this quiet confidence that actually inspires students. When you're prepped, you suddenly have the mental bandwidth to catch the kids who are falling behind, instead of just frantically trying to remember what you're supposed to say next.
Think about the wild, continuous psychological loop happening in every single classroom. A teacher's underlying beliefs about their students totally dictate the teacher's actions. But here's the crazy part. Those actions directly shape what a student believes about their own capabilities. And the loop just keeps going. The students' newly formed beliefs drive their behavior and their grades, which in turn completely validate the teacher's original beliefs. Understanding this cycle is step one in making sure we're creating positive upward spirals rather than self-defeating ones.
So the takeaway here is that teaching is not just dumping static facts into someone's brain. To teach is to get students actually involved in constructing knowledge themselves. You're creating the exact social and ethical conditions where students willingly take charge of their own learning. And the curriculum, it's way more than just a textbook. Our sources break it down into three parts: the intended curriculum written by society, the implemented curriculum that gets tweaked by classroom dynamics, and the achieved curriculum, which is what the learners actually walk out the door knowing. Our job is to align all three.
Moving right along to Section 2, Objectives and Learning Domains.
We hear the words aim and objective tossed around interchangeably all the time, right? But for a true Scharf Mufasser, we need to get crystal clear on the difference. An aim is your ultimate destination. It's broad, it's long-term. For example, an aim might be becoming a lifelong reader. Objectives, though, are the concrete, boots-on-the-ground steps to get there, like identifying the main character in Chapter 1 by Friday. Objectives have to be SMART plus C: specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, time-bound, and challenging. Basically, aims answer what is to be achieved over a lifetime, while objectives answer how you're going to do it by the end of today's lesson.
When we write those specific objectives, we're really looking at three main buckets or domains of learning. First up is the cognitive domain, famously associated with Benjamin Bloom, which targets intellect and thinking. Then we have the affective domain, spearheaded by David Krathwohl, dealing with feelings, values, and emotions. And finally, the psychomotor domain from Anita Harrow, focusing on physical, kinesthetic skills. By intentionally grabbing verbs from all three of these domains, we make absolutely sure we aren't just teaching to a student's brain, but we're also engaging their hands and their heart.
All right, Section 3, Anatomy of a Lesson.
A killer lesson isn't random. It flows through a really dynamic, orchestrated journey. You start with materials prepped and your objectives clearly visible. Then, and this is absolutely crucial, you activate background knowledge. You have to anchor the new concept to something they already know or it just won't stick. After that comes your direct instruction, where you model the concept. Then you smoothly transition into student practice, hit them with a quick, independent assessment to prove they got it, and wrap up with a home assignment. It creates this perfect, cohesive narrative from start to finish.
Now, zooming in on that student practice phase, it's actually a meticulous three-part mini-journey of its own. You don't just teach something and then immediately test them on it. First, you do guided practice. You do it together so they feel safe. Then, collaborative practice, where you let them test the waters with their peers. And only then do they reach independent practice, demonstrating true mastery all by themselves. It's a super deliberate, gradual release of responsibility.
Which brings us to Section 4, Power of Descriptive Feedback.
Let's be real for a second. Giving a letter grade or tossing out a quick, "good job," might make a student feel warm and fuzzy for a minute, but it can actually breed complacency. That's evaluative feedback.
And honestly, excessive praise often does more harm than good. Descriptive feedback is what actually moves the needle. Saying something like, hey, your thesis is super strong, but paragraph 3 needs more evidence. That tells the student exactly what they did right, exactly where they went wrong, and gives them the visible, actionable roadmap they need to actually level up.
And to make that feedback highly effective, it has got to be timely. We're talking right in the middle of the learning process, when the student can still fix things, not 3 weeks later at the end of a unit. It also has to be consistent and squarely focused on the learning intentions. The goal isn't to judge the kid. The goal is to hand them the exact data they need to course correct in real time.
And finally, Section 5, Mastering Micro Teaching.
So, what is the difference between macro and micro teaching? Well, macro is your everyday reality, managing a full class for a long time, juggling behaviors, content, and the clock all at once. Micro teaching scales all that massive complexity way down. You're teaching a tiny group of maybe 5 to 10 students for just 5 to 10 minutes. Why? Because it strips away the chaotic variables of a normal classroom, letting the teacher focus 100% of their energy on mastering just one specific technique.
Micro-teaching actually kicked off at Stanford back in the early 60s, created by Dwight Allen and his team, and it completely revolutionized teacher training. Think of it as a protected, totally risk-free laboratory. You aren't battling an exhausted or distracted crowd, you're just with peers. You can try a new strategy, completely mess it up, get constructive critique, and conquer one specific skill, like your pacing or how you ask questions, without any of the usual pressure.
And get this, it is so incredibly effective that it has evolved into the core component of 91% of on-campus clinical teaching programs today. 91%! It totally bridges the gap between just reading about education theories and actually standing up in front of a live room. It builds your confidence, irons out those rookie mistakes, and gives you instant peer feedback that is practically impossible to get once you're isolated in your own classroom. The whole engine behind this process is a cycle, often called the 4 R's: recording, reteaching, rediscussing, and redoing. It works like this. You plan a mini lesson, teach it while the camera's rolling, and immediately get critiqued by your peers. Then, armed with that fresh feedback, you replan the lesson, reteach it to a new group, and watch the improvements happen live. This loop literally locks your newly refined skill into muscle memory.
We've gone from the big, broad aims of society all the way down to a super specific 5-minute micro lesson. We've laid out a complete sharh mufassir of teaching mastery, but the learning never really stops, right? Whether it's your first year or your 20th, there is always room to grow. So I'm going to leave you with this final thought. What specific skill will you put under the microscope next?